Russian President Putin bends all the rules to save Americans, thanks to the wild antics of this homeless U.S. vet loose on Russian turf. Imagine winter 2025, a city locked in ice. Frost glazes the streets in thick, unyielding layers. Streetlights hum weakly over shattered pavement, and the metro rumbles like a restless beast beneath a sprawl choked by cold. Amid the bundled crowds shoving through the bitter wind, there's Jackson Cole, a man his own country discarded like yesterday's news. Once a soldier with a heart full of simple dreams, a snug cottage, a tidy fence, a quiet life with room to breathe. Now he's a specter hauling a frayed pack, a tattered banner of stars and stripes jammed in his pocket, the last fraying thread tethering him to a home that turned its back. He shuffles onto Metroline 5, breath clouding in the frigid air, eyes sunken and shadowed, dulled by years of fading into the cracks. Once he sprinted through flames, caught bullets for his squad, staked his life on the promise America would stand by him. Now he's a phantom drifting through a foreign labyrinth, erased by the nation he bled to defend. Back then, he was the heartbeat of something grand, fearless, unshakable. Now he's a faint pulse flickering under Moscow's grimy glow. His boots scrape the icy platform, each crunch a weary hymn to a life spilling away like sand through cracked hands. He doesn't speak much these days. Words lodge in his throat like jagged stones, useless when there's no one left to listen. The chill carves through his patched jacket, sinking deep into his bones. But it's a faint sting next to the gnawing void eating at his soul. He's been running on fumes for months, maybe years, scrounging crusts from trash bins, curling up in doorways with the wind as his blanket, clutching memories that are all he has left to keep him from letting go. Moscow was never the plan. He'd been adrift since the VA cut him loose, chasing odd jobs across borders until a botched flight and a lost passport dumped him here, a castaway in a frozen wasteland. He pulls that worn banner out sometimes, runs his rough fingers over the faded threads and mutters low, "This thing still means something, or was it all bullshit from the jump?" Back home, he'd seen it so vivid it hurt. Summer cookouts with burgers spitting grease on the grill, kids shrieking as they chased fireflies across the yard, a porch where he'd sink into a chair with a frosty beer, the day's weight sliding off his shoulders. That was the bargain. Fight for liberty? Come home a hero, live the good life. But the medals pinned to his chest didn't pay the rent, didn't silence the screams that jolted him awake, didn't stop the world from spinning on while he stood still. He'd lie there at night, staring at a ceiling he couldn't afford, hearing his little sister's laugh from years ago, high and bright like a bell, before the war turned it to static in his head. Ever feel like the promises you banked on just evaporated into thin air? Stick around. His story's about to twist in a way you'd never guess, and it's going to hit you where it hurts. Let's roll back before Moscow's shadow swallowed him whole. Picture Jackson Cole at 25, boots slamming Afghanistan's scorching dust, sweat streaking his face as he drags a wounded buddy through a hail of gunfire. Fearless then, a lion roaring through the chaos, fueled by a vow carved into his marrow. No one gets left behind. Pride swelled in his chest under that dusty uniform, medals clinking in his pocket, each one a story of courage louder than the explosions splitting the earth. He'd collapse at night on a cot that smelled of sweat and sand, eyes tracing the stars through a torn tent flap, dreaming of lazy evenings back home, rocking on a porch swing as the sun bled orange across the sky, little ones tumbling through the grass with sticky hands, the radio crooning Springsteen while a soda fizzed cold in his grip. That's what he fought for, a future so bright it kept him warm through the desert chill. He'd grin at his squad over lukewarm beers, their laughter bouncing off the dunes, promising they'd all make it back to those porches someday. But war's a thief with greedy hands. It doesn't just take lives, it steals pieces you didn't know you'd miss until they're gone. When he staggered home, no flags waved for him, no ticker tape, no handshakes, just a duffel bag slung over his shoulder and a silence that pressed down like lead. PTSD crept in like a fog, turning his mind into a battlefield that never slept. Gunshots cracking through his skull, faces of the fallen staring blank-eyed from the dark. His family tried to reach him, but the man who'd left wasn't the one who stumbled back. His wife's hugs grew stiff, her eyes searching for the guy she'd married, while his old buddies stopped texting, their voices replaced by the hum of a bar TV he'd stare at for hours. That dream house he'd pictured turned into a cage. Four walls closing in as bills stacked up and nightmares tore him apart. Jobs slipped away, one after another, because who hires a guy who flinches at a car backfiring or trails off mid-sentence, lost in a memory of blood and sand? He started wandering, first from bar stool to bar stool, nursing cheap whiskey that burned less than the quiet, then from park to park, bedding down under bridges with that silver star pinned inside his coat, its gleam a bitter joke against the life he'd lost. He'd pull it out under flickering streetlights, let it catch the glow, and growl through gritted teeth. Was it me, the war, or them, just moving on while I'm stuck here? The streets became his world, rain-soaked alleys where his boots squelched, benches hard as stone under a sky that didn't care. The drone of traffic his only lullaby. He'd sit there, watching kids kick soccer balls or couples stroll hand in hand, their laughter slicing through him like a blade. He'd been one of them once, someone's son, someone's brother, a shield in the storm. Back home, he was just another vet with a story no one bothered to hear, a man who'd given everything and got nothing but echoes in return. Ever had a dream you fought for just vanish into dust? Drop a yeah in the comments if you've been there. Jackson's war wasn't over yet, and the next fight was colder, darker, and lonelier than he'd ever imagined. Now he's scraping the bottom, a pit where hope's just a word you spit out with a laugh. He's huddled in the doorway of a Moscow clinic, turned away with a grunt because he's got no papers, no name they'd recognize, wrapped in a threadbare coat that lets the wind cut straight through. No wallet, no family, no one to call, just him and the ghosts clawing at his mind. They'd patched him up once after he'd crumpled in the street, a heap of rags and rasping breath, then shoved him back into the night with a shrug and a door slammed shut. He stumbles into the frost, legs trembling like they might snap, stomach snarling like a caged wolf, hollowed out by days without a real meal. Weeks since anything warm touched his lips. I ain't a soldier no more, he rasps, voice splintering like ice underfoot. Just some guy who used to count, who used to be somebody, raised on that iron creed, leave no man behind. Hammered into him from boot camp to battlefield, he'd lived it, breathed it, carried it like a torch through hell. Yet here he is, trudging through a blizzard in a city that doesn't know his face, abandoned by everyone who'd sworn they'd never turn away. He slumps against a chipped brick wall, ice piling up around his legs, hands quaking as he tries to shield his face from the gale. The streets thrum with life, horns blaring, boots crunching, voices chattering in a tongue he can't grasp. But it's all a blur, like he's sinking beneath a tide while the world spins on above. He used to storm into the fray, hoist a man twice his size across his shoulders just to say he did it, his squad cheering him on through the smoke. Now he can barely drag himself upright, each step a war he's losing. He sinks lower, knees buckling, frost soaking through his jeans, numbing him down to the marrow. Memories flicker like a dying film reel. His squad clinking bottles under a dusty sky, their grins wide and alive. His mom's silhouette in the doorway, waving him off with a smile that promised he'd come back. His sister's toothy giggle as she tugged his sleeve, begging for one more story. They blur, dissolving into the storm, slipping from his grip like smoke he can't hold. He grumbles into the wind. Gave 'em everything. My blood, my years, my damn soul. Now I'm just the leftovers, huh? The gale howls back, flinging ice into his face, a cruel laugh that stings worse than the cold. Time's a tangle when you're this far gone. Hours bleeding into days, maybe weeks. Who can tell? Shadows stretch long under the lamps. Faces pass in a hurry. Bundled coats, scarves tight, eyes averted. But no one stops. No one sees. He's a speck in the churn. A man who once stood tall, now crumpled in the freeze. Invisible to a world that's forgotten how to look. That metal's still in his pocket. A cold weight jabbing his ribs, mocking him with every shiver. It used to mean honor, duty, a legacy he'd carry proud. Now it's just metal, as useless as the dreams it came with, a trinket from a life that feels like someone else's. When all you've battled for turns to ash, even the strongest shatter. Think you'd keep fighting or let go? Tell me below. But even in this mess, a spark's about to flare, and it's coming from the last hand he'd ever expect to reach down. Night drags on, thick and suffocating, as he slumps outside a grimy Moscow diner. A cramped hole in the wall with fogged-up glass and the faint tang of beet soup drifting through the cracks. He's too beat to move, too frozen to care, his frame sagging against the brick like a puppet with cut strings. Ice stacks up around his legs, his breath a shallow puff swallowed by the blizzard's roar. He's fading, slipping into a haze where the cold feels almost soft, a lullaby pulling him under. Then, a silhouette cuts through the murk, sharp against the swirling white. A figure steps closer, no fancy coat, no swarm of guards, just a man with a bowl of steaming soup in hand, a quiet shadow trailing behind him, blending into the dark. "You're not alone," the man says, voice low and steady. An anchor dropped into the chaos as he sets the bowl beside Jackson. That man? Vladimir Putin? Yeah, the Putin, Russia's iron-fisted leader, the one America's squared off against across a tense, invisible line for decades. But tonight, he's not a president or a foe. He's just a guy kneeling in the slush, his breath fogging as he drapes a thick wool blanket over Jackson's trembling shoulders with hands that don't waver. Their eyes meet for a heartbeat. Jackson's wide and dazed, Putin's calm and unreadable, a flicker of something human passing between them. Then silence falls, heavy and real. No cameras roll, no speeches blare. Just a moment carved out of the storm, raw and unguarded. Putin stands, brushes snow off his knees, and melts back into the night, leaving nothing but footprints and a stunned soldier clutching a lifeline. Who'd have thought it? The man America's branded the big bad wolf, the enemy in 1,000 headlines, stooping down to pull a broken vet back from the abyss. It wasn't about flags or power plays. It was simpler, purer, a thread of kindness stitched into a night that had tried to unravel him. Jackson grips the bowl, warmth bleeding into his numb fingers, the first real heat he's felt in weeks, maybe months. He sips the broth, slow at first, tasting salt and life, then faster, gulping it down like a man starved for more than just food. The heat spreads, thawing the ice in his chest, chasing the numbness from his veins. He pulls the blanket tighter, its weight a shield against the wind, and for the first time in too long, he feels something. Safety, maybe, or the ghost of a fight he'd buried deep. He stares at the empty bowl, steam still curling faintly, and whispers, "Why me? Why now?" Not to the storm, but to the shadow that's already gone. Can kindness hit you from the last place you'd look? That spark didn't just warm him. It lit something bigger, a fire that'd carry him further than he'd dared hope, a flame he'd carry back across the ocean. That blanket didn't just wrap around his shoulders. It woke something he'd thought was dead. Back in Moscow, that soup didn't just heat his hands. It stirred a pulse he'd lost. He started talking again, first to a scrappy mutt that wouldn't leave his side, its matted fur brushing his leg as he shared a crust he'd scavenged. Then to a barman who slid him a free coffee, black and bitter, nodding as Jackson rasped out bits of his story between sips. Bit by bit, he remembered who he'd been. A fighter, a brother, a man who didn't quit. A local aid worker overheard him one night, her coat dusted with snow, and pressed some crumpled bills and a one-way ticket into his hand. Enough to get him back to America, back to a fight he wasn't done with. He didn't just land stateside, he hit the ground with a fire rekindled, a purpose burning through the haze. One rainy Tuesday, he walked into a veterans hall, boots still caked with travel grit, and faced rows of faces like his, tired, scarred, searching for something to hold on to. He held up that tattered banner, its edges frayed but its colors stubborn, and his voice rang out, steady as stone. "I was lost out there. Thought I'd failed you, failed myself, failed every promise I ever made. But one hand in the dark, one bowl of soup in a storm, showed me we're worth saving, every damn one of us." They didn't just listen. They leaned in, eyes wide, some glistening with tears, because they saw their own ghosts in his words, their own battles in his scars. He started small, sharing coffee with guys on street corners, their hands shaking around chipped mugs as they traded stories of wars that never ended. Then it grew. Nights in church basements thick with cigarette smoke, talks at VFW posts where the chairs creaked under the weight of memory, a notebook stuffed with names and numbers of men and women he swore he'd pull up with him. Late at night, he'd sit by a flickering lamp, scribbling his story, how he'd hit the bottom of a frozen pit, how a stranger's quiet act hauled him out, how he'd vowed to keep reaching back for the ones still down there. That medal hangs on his wall now, not a taunt but a badge of what he's overcome. It shines softer but truer than it ever was in the desert. In Moscow, he'd been a phantom, a whisper in the wind. Here, he's a beacon, a flare cutting through the dark. Word spread, first in murmurs over bar counters, then in shouts across packed rooms, about the vet who'd clawed back from the edge, who'd turned one bowl of soup into a lifeline for thousands. He'd stand on makeshift stages, stripes waving behind him, sunlight slicing through dusty windows, and tell them, "We ain't forgotten, not by me, not now, not ever." From that frozen hell, a soldier fought his way back. Not all the way, not yet, but enough to stand for the ones still lost, the ones he'd carried in his heart through every mile of dust and ice. Kindness doesn't care about borders or enemies. It's a torch that pierces the black, and Jackson's fanning it into a blaze that lights up the shadows. Know a vet who's struggling out there? Tag 'em below. This one's for them, a story to remind them they're not alone. If this hit you, don't just scroll. Share it with someone who needs a spark, and smash that subscribe so we can keep these stories coming. Keep that fire burning for everyone who's still fighting.